Moving on to public, another public hearing, an ordinance amendment to the Town Code, Section 158-9 and 158-17 pertaining to the removal of the 1993 on-street parking policy and rescind the 1993 resolution pertaining to the same. This is the first reading. Ms. Barrett.
Council is requested to affirm on its first reading an ordinance to amend and reenact Town Code Sections 158-9 and 158-18 pertaining to the removal of the 1993 on-street parking policy and to rescind the 93 resolution pertaining to the same.
All right, this public hearing is now open. Ms. Berry, do we have anyone to speak?
We do not.
This public hearing is now closed. Gentlemen?
Mr. Mayor, I move the council affirm on this first reading of the ordinance to amend and reenact Town Code Sections 158-9, 158-18 pertaining to the removal of the 1993 on-street parking policy and to rescind the 1993 resolution pertaining to the same as presented.
Second.
Motion second, discussion.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. The Chief of Police, Town Manager, and I met several times to discuss the parking down there, and it was very confusing. You had 2 hours, you had 4 hours, you had all kinds of discretion, and we were out of choice of words, whack, like the previous ordinance was not being carried through properly. And this one here, if I was a newcomer to this community, it was very confusing when you sit there and try to figure out where do I park. There's a 2-hour sign here and a 4-hour. Then we're asking the chief to enforce it. And it was very confusing. There's no way you could enforce the way the ordinance is written. So we had to go in and revise some of it. That's the purpose. And bring everything in conjunction with the code now.
Anyone else? Ms. Berry?
Councilman Connolly?
Yes.
Councilman Gillespie?
Yes.
Councilman Meza?
Yes.
Councilman Morrison?
Yes.
Councilman Seelog?
Yes.
And Vice Mayor Tewall?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. That too was the first reading. We'll be back the next meeting in January. All right, moving on to number 10, public hearing, ordinance amendment to the Town Code, Section 148-870.A.17 and 175-127 to exempt property from off-street parking requirements. David Downs at 14 and 16 Chester Street, and this is the first reading. Ms. Berry.
In June, a request was received from Mr. Downs to amend Code Section 175-127.3 to exempt the requirement of off-street parking requirements for property located on Chester. The Planning Commission unanimously recommended against the requested change because they did not want to allow more exemptions in the downtown area for any uses or properties until a parking strategy was developed to address the increasing demand for downtown parking. There were 3 drafts including for the Commission's consideration at the hearing. 1, to amend the code to exempt properties on the portion of Chester from East Main to Laura, Virginia from the requirement for off-street parking. 2, to amend the code as in number 1 but requires the approval of the SUP. 3, to amend the code as in number 1 but would exempt the museums and art galleries from off-street parking within the historic district. The property qualifies for a separate lesser exemption that applies to commercial buildings, which does not require the applicant to meet the off-street parking requirements, but requires the existing parking to remain in place, meaning the current rear parking area. Council is requested to choose one of the options listed or to accept the Planning Commission's recommendation and deny the request until a parking strategy is developed to address the parking in the downtown area.
All right, this is a public hearing that I'm going to open. Ms. Berry, do we have anyone signed up to speak?
We do. We have several this evening. The first is David Downs.
Please come to the podium, state your name and your address for the record, please.
David Downs, 160 Old Browntown Road, Front Royal, Virginia. I'm dressed in revolutionary attire this evening to commemorate the 243rd anniversary of the Battle of Great Bridge, in which Virginians told England that they were not going to be treated unequally anymore. And it was such an important, so important right of Virginians that we ultimately created a country asserting those rights to be treated equal. First and foremost, in pursuit of that being treated equal, I want to thank each and every one of the councilmen here. I think I've been everyone's ear that's sitting before me, and I want to especially recognize Jeremy Camp and his staff for going out of their way and being responsive to my questions, educating me on the history of off-street parking in Front Royal, which goes back decades. I want to recognize Doug Napier and his staff, who have been extraordinary as well in trying to explain to a lawyer that does not specialize in municipal law exactly how this works. And I'm not suggesting I've become an authority on it, but I have learned a few things. And I'm going to try to be real brief. I know I've just got a couple of minutes by responding to the comments made by the Planning and Zoning Commission from September 19, 2018, and try to crystallize our position, many of which you are already familiar with. I'm going to highlight the comments of Commissioner Merchant. First, he notes that parking spaces are not free and they often occupy prime land, are expensive to build and costly to maintain. I agree wholeheartedly. That is why I should not be singled out as the only downtown business required to maintain off-street parking. The comment was made that the town does not want any further exemptions. I would duly and sincerely appeal to each and every one of you that there are so many exemptions that the exemptions swallow the rule. If you look at a map of downtown Front Royal, Main Street is exempt in total, all of East Main. Most of Jackson Street. Now, all the other home property owners are also exempt where they don't have any off-street parking. So the burden, if you will, falls on property owners not on those special streets and not already having zero parking. I understand the argument, well, it's the same ordinance for everyone, but that's the same argument for Jim Crow laws, where there are separate water fountains in schools and special places at the end of the bus, and that was the law, and because I happen to be located in a certain location, I am treated differently. The issue isn't that I'm not being treated differently. I think we can intellectually agree on that. The question is, should it be justified? Is it rational? I would submit for the past 15 years, I have not used but 2 parking spaces for my business because the other building lay vacant. The court may, all of you may recall, we've gone through a tough recession where we could not find people to fill our buildings. That's still true with many Main Street properties. I'm trying my very best to do something to generate business and interest downtown Front Royal, and I've done so by creating a unique museum. And I'm trying to expand that opportunity. Second point, he agrees that the ordinance amendment for the Planning Commission is not about fences or boundary disputes. Yet, I understand that the speakers that will follow me are going to want to talk about their right to walk across my property. If they had that right, their remedy is in circuit court, not before this honorable council. And not to criticize me for wanting to simply assert my property rights for the property that I've been paying taxes on since 1999. Mr. Merchant noted that is an inconvenience to a town ordinance is probably something that get experienced by every business owner in town. This is where I disagree. That is not true because other business owners similarly situated are not required. Mr. Waller, who signed up, would be required to have 31 off-street parking spaces if that statute ordinance applied to him. He has 0. I pay more taxes than he does. I still am forced to maintain this property, which I'm not using. And you're going to cut me off, aren't you?
Yes, sir. You're 4.5 minutes, so sorry, Dave.
I understand.
I think
As an exhibit, I would like to give a FOIA response reflecting 10 criminal investigations.
Please give them to the clerk of council for us. Thank you, Dave. Are they relevant for tonight's decision?
It is if one of
Could
the
you pass those down, please?
if one of the speakers suggests that we're generating crimes at the beer museum.
Okay. Good. Yeah, pass them down, please.
Thank you, Councilman.
You're welcome.
The next speaker is William Huff.
Please come to the podium, state your name and your address, sir.
Good evening. William Huff, 409 East Main Street, Front Royal, Virginia. Y'all have a big decision to make tonight on this particular agenda, and it weighs heavy on each and every one of you, I know. You're going to hear a lot of people state a lot of different things about this. As a business owner in Front Royal, Virginia, being in the area that we are in, by law, that are written into the ordinances, I believe personally that David Downs should be granted this exemption from parking, as is every other business that is around him. On a personal level of taking over somebody else's parking spots that's not theirs is not the case in this matter, which will be spoken against here in a few minutes from some other people. So I say, weigh your heart, look at your ordinance, look at the business growth that we have in our community, and vote where it needs to be voted. So each side brings good points. Each side has something right said and something wrong said. I see both sides of this. As a business in this community, I say there's no other way but to vote for this ordinance and giving him the exemption of parking. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Ms. Kolsnick.
Please state your name and your address for the record, please.
My name is Ina Kolasnik, 214 East Main Street. Today I came to speak regarding the ordinance amendment request from Mr. Downs to exempt 14 and 16 Chester Street from off-street parking requirement of the town code. I don't see the point of amending the town code, and let me explain the reason why. 14 and 16 Chester Street were not originally included into area that were exempt from the off-street parking requirements because, in contrast to buildings on East Main Street and Jackson Street, buildings on 14 and 16 Chester Street had parking space. And the intent of the town planners to look at this development of the town as a whole was that the area behind 14 and 16 Chester Street would be used for parking. In other words, 14 and 16 Chester Street have parking and should continue retaining the area for parking. Their customers are allowed to use the public parking lot, so there is no need for off-street parking. Moreover, approval of off-street parking for 14 and 16 Chester Street would not resolve the overcrowded parking lot problem. In fact, the overload on a public parking lot was in part created by Mr. Downs' restriction of access to area commonly used as parking. The downtown would now have more public parking space if Mr. Downs would not block off the area behind his buildings. I believe such unfriendliness to the neighboring businesses and the public should not be rewarded with amendment to town code. I hope that in your decision you will be using town code, which states in chapter 175-127-3, the number of existing parking spaces shall not be reduced for display or other purposes. In addition to what I already said, I would like to remind that Virginia Beer Museum Foundation had been violating Town Municipal Code, Chapter 46-2, drinking in public, for more than a year. I'm not sure how the town addresses repeating violations, but nevertheless, I believe that violators should not be rewarded with amendments of Town Code. Last but not least, argument against amending Town Code, for example, 14 and 16 Chester Street, from off-street requirements would be that this amendment would create a precedent for other businesses, museums, or non-profit organizations to be excluded from off-street parking requirements. Think how this would affect the harmonious town development. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you.
Mr. Waller.
Please state your name and address for the record, please.
Ralph Waller, 304 East Main Street. First of all, I don't think Mr. David Downs understands what the Jim Crow law was. Has nothing to do, this has to do with him and his parking that he's not using. And I don't think he pays more taxes than I do. So anyway, we'll start from there. The Town Planning Commission is a group of highly trained professionals who have been entrusted to decide what the town needs now and for future growth, which includes parking. The Planning Commission decided by a 6-0 vote not to allow off-street parking for 1416 Chester Street. In other words, all members looked at the situation as a whole and unanimously agreed not to allow off-street parking. And nothing's changed that I can see since they rendered their decision. Now, Mr. Downs likes to threaten people. In the Northern Virginia Daily News article dated November the 3rd, 2018, page A2, written by Josh Gully, Mr. Downs said his alternative would be to seek legal action to sue the town or relocate to a friendly location. In other words, Mr. Downs does not care what is best for the town but his own self-interest. Mr. Downs did not get his way, so he'll try and intimidate the town council by a lawsuit or relocating. Since it's a nonprofit entity, the town will not lose any revenue by his departure. The tactics by Mr. Downs that I mentioned should not be a reason to reward him off-street parking for 1416 Chester Street. I would remind the town council they owe responsibility to the citizens who elected them to look out for the best interests of the community. And one of the planning commission members, he posted on Facebook that she's with the government, I'm from the government, and I'm asking for your property. This is just another part of his bullying tactics to get his way. As I stated before, the Beer Museum has had 3 reported instances to the ABC board. I witnessed 2. One of them was they had a gentleman escorted from the building, had 2 guns and a knife, and the other was one guy on a Sunday afternoon screaming and yelling at the people in the beer place. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a Merry Christmas.
Thank you, Ms. Walker.
That was the last speaker, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. This meeting is now closed. Gentlemen, you may-
Mr. Mayor, I move that council affirm on its first reading an ordinance to amend Front Royal Town Code, section 175-127.3 and 148-870-alpha.17, but exempt museums and art galleries from off-street parking requirements as presented.
Second.
have a motion second. Ready for discussion? Hearing no discussion, Ms. Berry? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Ms. Berry.
This is on option 3, correct?
Correct.
Councilman Connolly?
No.
Councilman Gillespie?
No.
Councilman Mezza?
Yes.
Councilman Morrison?
Yes.
Councilman Seelon?
Yes.
Vice Mayor T-Wall?
No.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.